Welcome. You are joining us for To Accept or to Change, the Wisdom to Know the Difference. This is a live stream panel discussion brought to you by the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism. I want to thank you for... Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us this evening. I feel like this is a really important conversation that we're going to be having tonight, something that's really been on my heart, on my mind, and I know a number of people that I've been talking to as well. The news has been flooded with tragedy after tragedy of racism, terrorism, hate crimes, violence, and I don't know about you, but for me and a number of people that I've been talking to, as I said, it's sparking fears, anger, grief within the hearts, the minds, the bellies of people, as well as dividing people and, sparking fears and division between people. And whether you have been directly affected or involved in any of the things that have been going on, it just seems like it is so widespread, or if you've just been a witness to the news and what's been going on and crossing the Facebook feeds, the social medias, all of the different forms of media that are bombarding us in our faces, it's really hard to avoid being affected by and impacted by everything that is going on. So I'm just, seeing in people, this can become terrifying and paralyzing, and also it pushes us to that point of asking that question, what can we do? It's easy to fall into that place of feeling helpless and hopeless and fearful for ourselves and our families, and that question comes up of, well, is there anything I can do to affect some sort of change in the world without endangering my life or the life of my family and my community, or making things worse? And it's so, we are left sitting in this place, many of us are left sitting in the place of wondering, okay, is there anything I can do? Should I just accept this as God's will and, God's plan for what's playing out in the world, or should I step up and become an agent for change? And I know we've been getting this question a lot lately in our community. It's been coming up a lot for discussions. The question is, as an average Joe, average person, what can we do? And more importantly, there's the question of, what is God asking of us as individuals? How are we being asked to live our lives and, and to carry, for those of us who love God in our hearts and want to live that love in the world? What is being asked of us? And how can we do our part to hold the love in the world, to spread love and peace in the world, to hold that place, and to make the world a safer place for us and our families, our communities, and our brothers and sisters around the world? This is showing up locally in the United States as well as globally. And so it's a big question. So again, thank you for joining us. This is the topic of tonight's panel discussion, and we've got a beautiful panel with us this evening. Again, we're sponsored by the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, and all of our panel members, our panelists, are graduates of the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism. This is our common ground, and my name is Mastora Grenard, Deborah Grenard, and I'm your host. I'm also a graduate of the university. I've been with the university for 18 years now, and serve as the University Relations Coordinator. Now, I'm going to introduce each one of our panelists, and I'm just going to take you guys in alphabetical order, and I'll give each one a chance to answer or give a response to this question, this topic, based on what they're doing. Now, our panelists are all working in their professions, dealing with these kinds of issues every day in the fields of law, social justice, mediation, spiritual counseling, family healing, family relations. And so this is something that each one of these panelists is facing and working with, and they are amazing experts in their field, as well as exquisite hearts and dedicated, devoted souls to making the world a better place. So our panelists today are Rahima Kamala Laird, who is an attorney. Now I'm going to introduce each one in more detail as it's their turn to speak. But we have Rahima Kamala Laird, who is an attorney. We also have Hassan Roy Martin, an attorney. And we have Amina Melody Pryor, who is a family healing and spiritual counselor. Now, as I said, I'm going to go in alphabetical order. Now, one other thing, we will be taking questions after they've given their initial response. So if you have questions, you can take notes, of course. There's also on the page where you're watching this, if you're watching this on the Essence of the One blog post, you can see down at the bottom of the page there's a place for comments, and I'll be monitoring those comments. You can enter your questions in those comment fields, and in the comments, and I'll read them back to the panelists when it's time for Q&A. So if you're watching this on the Google Hangouts, you can go to essenceoftheone.com, and you'll see it's our second blog post there is the one where you can just click on that. It says live stream, and then scroll down to the bottom and write in your questions. Okay. Yes, and Mariam has put a response in there. You can ask your questions of the panelists here. Thank you, Mariam. Okay. So we're going to start, as I said, with Rahima Kamala Laird. So let me introduce Kamala. Kamala is, as I said, an attorney at law. She is a founder of Integrate Legacy Law. She is committed to guiding clients to identify their life purpose and then integrate that legacy into their lives in a way that makes a lasting difference. She is an experienced communication and relationship coach, mediator, spiritual counselor who integrates these skills with her legal training to provide a holistic approach to estate planning. She has a special knack for supporting clients through conversations with family members regarding ends of life, incapacity, and guardianship. Now, this is just a very brief introduction to her specialty and what she does. I'm going to let her give us a little bit more information about her because she is an amazing human being, everything that she has done and what really qualifies her to respond to this question. So, Kamala, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give your response, if you would.
Thank you, Master. Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here speaking. A little bit more about my background before I get into answering the question. I attended the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism back when it had a different name from 2000 to 2004, and I've been really a lifetime student of Sufism, quite literally. I was born into a Sufi community and have studied a few different forms of Sufism throughout my life. And social justice has always been important to me as well. I was also born into a family that has a lot of peace activism in its roots, generation after generation. And I've noticed over my years, speaking to my grandma and my mom and my siblings, that we really have a very, very deep commitment to change the world in a way that we feel will benefit ourselves and others, and really global society as a whole. So it's true that this is really a perfect topic for me to speak on. And that said, I will begin with a slight disclaimer. I don't claim to have the answer to this question. And I've had many different versions of struggling with this question over my years. So I'll give you what I've come to know today and what I've come to experience today, knowing that it's really still an evolution for me as far as understanding my life's purpose and really humanity's purpose at large. So that's a disclaimer. The other small disclaimer is that some of what I'll say I'll attribute to a very dear friend of mine, Daniel Schmachtenberger, who is working very hard to create social change, and I've had conversations with him on this topic, so some of what I say will come from his heart. So I see this question as really a question on how to make decisions in life. And we have some tools through the Sufi community and the Sufi training as far as prayer and even very specific forms of praying to get an answer on what we should do and how we should act. And I know that the question is very dear to people's hearts in our community, because if you think of how we related to Sidi, in many ways we looked to Sidi to give us answers on what we should do and how we should do it. And a lot of those questions that we asked him had to do with how can we contribute to the world? How can we best use ourselves? You know, we would ask him whether we should live in this city or that city, whether we should take this job or that job. We asked him a lot of questions about how to act. So I know that this is a question all of us deal with. And my assertion would be that a lot of us don't feel like we have the answer. And that's why we look to external sources, whether it be CD or someone else. So I hope, my prayer is that my answer will give you some relief in your journey, because I've found some relief in this answer. So the question comes from our understanding that there's a lot of corruption in the world, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of suffering, and we see things that we can't understand as being a part of God's creation. If God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving, how could we have child soldiers? How could we have animals being methodically tortured? How could we have war over and over and over again over history? How could we have sex trafficking with youth, right? We have things that everybody would say are horrendous, and it's hard for us to balance that with an all-loving, all-powerful God. And I think most of us agree that we have free will. Humans have been given this special agency, right? So those are the components that we're wrestling with in this question. So my answer today starts with, there's a fallacy in the question. Do we accept God's will, or do we act from our own free will? I think there's a fallacy in that question. I think in many ways they're one and the same, and I'll lead you there in my version of the explanation. So how do we know whether to love what is and accept what is and focus on seeing the beauty in it, or how do we act to change things, right? Because I think those of us with spiritual paths tend to get to those two options. Either we just kind of deal with, okay, this is the way it is, let's look at the beauty in it, let's look at the reasons why it is that way, let's learn from the way it is, right? Or we divert attention to changing the way it is. We work for social justice, we work for social change, we work to change ourselves, we work in our family, we work in our homes, right? So if we look back at the Thomas Edison, the Edison philosophy, he tried to make a light bulb thousands and thousands and thousands of times until he finally made a light bulb. So how do we know to do that? Or in our 109th try, or maybe our 5th try, to say, okay, clearly I'm not doing the right thing, I should stop and try something else, right? So I think there's a tendency to say, if God is all-loving, all-powerful, and all-knowing, then there's some reason all this suffering is here. You know, it's clearing karma, or whatever your version of that explanation is. But then we kind of rationalize it. Like, if God's okay with it, I'm okay with it. And we find peace in that, but I kind of feel like that's in some ways a fake peace, because we don't really know that it's okay. We're just throwing faith against the wall and saying somehow God created it, so it's okay. So my answer kind of moves away from the creator agent explanation and starts to look at the world as an evolution. So we look at God as a creative process God. So we look at the world and we see there's synergy, right? That there's a whole made from parts, and the whole has more elements, more attributes, new qualities than the parts. Okay? So there's a evolution of society over time, biology, socially. We're in this progression, we're in this evolution towards more complexity. And if you look at the brain, the human brain, mammalian brain coming out of a reptilian brain, we're evolving into this place of being able to have subjectivity and analysis and much more evolved consciousness. Okay? So we look at the direction that the universe is going and we say that is God's will. There's an evolution happening. There's a higher level of existence being created over time that we can point to in so many different ways. But let's just look at it now. Human beings have a very, very advanced capacity to develop, to create, to organize, to strategize. So we look at our ability to participate in that synergistic evolution. Okay? If something calls us to act, if we see that something's wrong, then we are a part of that synergistic evolution. If you feel in your heart the calling to do something about the things you see, then I see that as you are a part of the evolution of the universe as God created it. So to me, it's really one and the same. What God created is our capacity to evolve and to see what's wrong and to do something about it. And that desire that we feel inside ourselves as social justice activists, whatever level you are, find that fits inside the plan. It's not counter to the plan. So we've evolved to have the ability to do something, and we've evolved to have the desire to do something. So my answer is, don't just sit back and say it must be the will of God, watch the pain and suffering, and deal with it, because I think that's what people do who don't feel powerful, who don't feel like they have the ability to make a change. They sit back and they say, well, that's God's plan, that's the way it's supposed to be, but there's a major disempowerment in that. So I would say, as you personally get more powerful, meaning higher consciousness, more attuned to your life purpose, cleaning the trauma from your past, as you have a clearer mirror inside yourself, then you naturally gravitate towards a desire to help others, to heal the world, to create this synergistic evolutionary being where we have capacities beyond what people did before us, because we are actually evolving towards a greater strength, towards greater power as a combined humanity. So I'm probably near my time. Am I close to my time, Mr.? I would say that if you feel the pull, then act on it, because that pull is God's will.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rahima.
Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful answer.
Thank you. Alhamdulillah.
Okay. So I think before we go into questions, I'm going to go ahead and give everyone a chance to respond. Yeah. So powerful answer. Thank you again. Now, our next panelist is Roy Martin. And I had muted you there for a minute, Roy. Now I'm going to go ahead and let people know a little bit about who you are, and then we'll hear your response. Hassan, oh, you know what? I just want to say one thing of clarification. Now, Rahima mentioned Sidi, the name Sidi. Sidi is the name of our spiritual teacher and guide who are the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism was founded under his teachings. He is the head of the Shadaliya Sufi order. He's from Jerusalem. He's recently passed, and most of us have had the opportunity to study with him for many years. He passed last November and still lives with us in our hearts and souls. Our mission at the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism is to carry the teachings and Sidi's vision of spreading the message of love, peace, mercy, justice, equality, and freedom to every household in the world. Okay, now with that, I'll introduce Roy Martin, attorney at law. Hassan Roy Martin. He met our spiritual guide, who we call Sidi, and became his student in 2006. Roy is a peacemaking attorney and mediator who resides in Bellingham, Washington, with his wife Latifa and their son Ahmed. Roy was raised in a Jewish family, came to Sufism by way of many years of spiritual seeking on many paths. When he met Sidi, he knew he had finally found his way home. Being Sidi's student was both an enormous blessing and a challenge because Sidi was not afraid to show his students whatever he was guided to show them. Isn't that the truth? This is a path of annihilation of the ego, and it requires a willingness to surrender your ego again and again and again and again and again. I'm embellishing just a little bit on his agains there, but it's true. It's as in if you're on a spiritual path, it's something that you do in every moment, and there's still more because we're still humans. But as we do so, we discover on the other side of our resistance tremendous harmony and freedom. Those parts of ourselves that we had thought integral to who we are and perhaps cherished and held dear, we finally discover have been in our way. As these shards of false self fall away, we come to a place progressively deeper rest. We come to a place of progressively deeper rest in our real truth, which is in perfect alignment with the qualities of love and unity. It is a journey that goes on and on as we discover in small slices our true home, our deep love, and yearning for the great oneness that stands behind all that manifests in this world and beyond. And these are the words of our beloved Hassan Roy Martin. So I'll let you tell us a little bit more about you and your specialty and give your response. Thank you, Hassan.
Thank you.
Okay, hold on one second. Now, Roy, I'm going to just okay, you're turned up all the way, but I'm going to let people know Roy's having a little bit of trouble with his microphone, so you might see the top of his head as he leans in close to his microphone and speaks loudly, but it's very important that we hear him. So take a good look at his face, and then you're going to see the top of his head for the next few minutes.
I'm going to speak up really loud, and if it's not loud enough, Ms. Dora, please let me know, and I'll do whatever I need to do, even if it means sitting right on top of the microphone.
Okay, great, thanks.
You know, I find this such a profound question, because it's so easy to move from the mass, from the ego, and yet what we're trying to do on this path is to learn to discern the deeper truth of the heart, and ultimately to move from what Allah is asking of us. And this is particularly pointed for me because I've spent so much of my life doing things from a place of duty, and what goes with that, a sense of blame and guilt and shame and obligation. And this is all part of my Jewish upbringing. And I was, raised to be responsible. So I'm a responsible husband and father who does the right thing and is committed to doing the right thing, and that's great. But so often what drives it isn't great. It comes from this sense of, it's not coming from, I think where it's supposed to come from, my sense is from the deep teaching, is that it comes from, what we would say is al-hay in Arabic, or chai in Hebrew, as in l'chaim, to life. But it so often instead comes from this place of should or must or have to. And when I first met Sidi, he asked me what my question was, the way he would always do with us, to open a door. And I didn't know what he meant at first, but I looked in my heart, and sure enough, there was a question. And I said, how do I know if this is my path? Because, to me, it was like what I was holding is like, if you tell me this is my path, and if I believe you, then I will sign a contract in blood. I will open a vein and sign in blood, because that was where I came from. And it would be like, I will, have this lifelong commitment to this path. And he just kind of, he could feel that, even though I didn't say it. And my sense of him was like, no, that's not what it's about at all. And he said something that made no sense to me, at least initially. He said, what's in your heart? And I didn't even know what that meant, because I didn't operate from that place of looking to see what was moving in my heart. So I didn't even understand the concept. So my initial assumption was that he was just another spiritual faker trying to manipulate me into following him, and that he probably wanted money. But it very soon became clear that that's not what he was doing at all. And another one of his students had brought me to the path and really wanted me to do this, and that was kind of moving between us. And he actually began yelling at this person as if he had been present for our private conversations. And he was yelling, though, in a really loving way that looking back on it, it makes sense, because as I became his student, as I got deeper, he would do that with me too. Where if there was something I was holding on to strongly and wasn't able to let go, he might yell at me in a loving way to break it open. So that's what was happening. And he was yelling at this person. He was being really emphatic and saying, it's really important that I not be pushed, that I didn't need to do this. And very pointedly, he said, it must be his choice. He doesn't need this. And I think that was as much for me as for her, because it was like I needed to hear that. I needed to get that, that he wasn't trying to rope me in. And looking back, he was being really gentle with me because I wasn't ready to be yelled at. And this other person was really far ahead of me on the path and was in a place where, yelling was okay. But, what he brought through was perfect in that moment, as it always was with him. And anything more would have pushed me away. And what I got in that moment when he said, he doesn't need to do this, is that he wasn't trying to coerce or manipulate me. Or at least if he was doing this really brilliant game of 11-dimensional chess, which itself would be proof that he was some kind of spiritual master, and he was the kind of person who was worth hanging around. And then he turned back to me, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but he was like showing me that this other person, wanted to help me walk on this path, and that it was my choice. And he said something like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was like, I had this image of her heart being like a lantern wanting to illuminate the path up ahead. And then he said, and it's all right to say yes. And again, that was something that really hit me hard. It stuck with me. I didn't entirely know what it meant at that point. It's all right to say yes. Because again, he was touching on that moving from the heart, and I didn't really know what that was. But it was like something was really intriguing about that. Because what an exciting notion that it's okay to say yes.
Roy?
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm going to ask you to just come a little bit closer to your mic and lean down. We're just going to have to get a real close-up of you. It's still a little bit hard to hear you. And maybe if you speak a little bit slower, then it will come through. Okay? I'm sorry.
Anyhow, what an exciting notion this was to me. And I finally, as I got to a place that I could understand it, it became even more exciting. He was seeing a yes that was already in my heart, but I had yet to find it for myself. And he was showing me the way to find it, but doing so in a really gentle manner, because I still had this allergy to any sense of being pushed or told what to do, because I had grown up in this family that was all about duty, and everything in my family seemed to come with strings attached. The CD was showing me this other possibility and was making it clear to me that I had total freedom, although he was just planting seeds, because I wasn't quite dropping it at that point. And it was hard to know what to do with this because I so wasn't used to it. But a few minutes after walking away from that first encounter with him, I saw this image of myself in my mind's eye, and I was flying home on the airplane after not taking the promise and not becoming his student. And the me that I saw in my mind looked so sad and forlorn. And I was looking at this going, wow, why am I so sad? And then it hit me that it was because for the zillionth time in my life, I had listened to my mind and to my fears rather than to what was truly moving in my heart. And I saw that it was like a kind of living death, like I was living in a coffin of my own creation. And so that was really powerful. And then, over time, again and again on this path, Sidi would show me or help me to see the possibility of moving from my heart. And he would help me to notice what was moving in my heart and to realize that Allah was the one who put it there. And to get that that's where our guidance shows up, that Allah places it in our hearts. And discerning that can be challenging sometimes because we have to get beneath our egos to find it. But that's what this path is about. And he said to me several times in slightly different forms, something like, I don't see what you see. I see with an eye in my heart. And each time he was almost smiling when he said it. And it was a smile that was full of love and mirth and perhaps even a sense of awe. Like he was trying to say to me, if only you could see what I'm seeing. And, it's like I've got to caution you if you're new to this. I mean, those of us who have been around for a while know that, everyone's walking is different, and Seedi could give could get the same question from two different people and give them completely different answers, seemingly even opposite answers. So, I mean, clearly this guidance was for me, but it was really powerful. And let me give you another example. A few years into my time on this path, I was a teaching assistant at the university. I was living in Tucson, which isn't where I had wanted to settle, but a divorce and becoming a sole custodian of 2 children had, in my mind, prevented me from living where I really wanted to live. At least that was the picture I held about it, or the story I was telling myself about it. It was, of course, coming through my naps and my Jewish sense of responsibility. My heart wanted to be back in the Pacific Northwest, where I had lived when the kids were born, but I didn't want to upend their lives because they had been through such a terrible custody battle, which was so destabilizing. And then their mom eventually left them, and their grandparents were close by, and they were settled in school and community, and they had friends. And so, rightly or wrongly, but with the best of intentions, I made a life in Arizona out of this sense of, well, this is what I need to do. So years later, as my youngest was getting ready to go off to college, and in fact going to school in Seattle, it occurred to me that I finally had the freedom to leave. But as it's all too easy to do for someone who lives from the mind, or tends to live from the mind, I looked at the law practice I had built and the life I'd created in Arizona, and decided that it was just my naps that wanted to move and that I could let that go. And I was actually pretty sure that this was, the holy answer. But, looking back, I can see my naps, my fingerprints, my own biases all over it. Because, of course, to me, the highest and holiest looked like the driest and most lifeless of possibilities. But fortunately, I was assisting at the university then, and being on the land is really powerful. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, it forces us to move beyond our naps, and it sometimes forces us to get out of our own way. And so there I was on the land, assisting at a school section, and we had this series of overcast days. And you know how the clouds sometimes accumulate in the box canyon where the land is? Well, one morning, I looked up at the sky and just felt my heart yearning to return to the Northwest. And this yearning was so obvious that even I, as dense and stupid as I can be, couldn't ignore it. But it was confusing too, because the idea felt good, and I kind of thought that if it felt good, it must just be my naps, or at least I had that concern, and I didn't want to do something big as a major relocation from a place of illusion. So as Rahima alluded to, I went to ask Seedi, like, what do I do? And he said, yes, this is blessed. And by then, my trust in him was pretty solid. I'd been on the path for a while, and I noticed that he didn't ever say anything that was wrong. So, if he had said no, I wouldn't have done it. But he said yes, so I started to think about it and make plans. And it really has been blessed in so many ways. Which doesn't mean that there's been no struggle, but the struggle has all been good struggle, and meaningful and powerful struggle. And overall, it's been clear that this is my way forward, and most things have just opened easily. And now, several years later, I'm living this life that I had only dreamed of back then, and for so many years. And I'm in this, this beautiful house in the woods, and I have this office overlooking the Puget Sound and the San Juans, right out my window here. And more important than any of that outer stuff, I got married again, which had everything to do with, Seedi guiding me and helping me to break my naps and to see that I was standing in my own way. And he even said, you're just on the day that he married me, when he said, you're listening to Shaitan and you're not going to find what you're looking for there, when I wasn't sure if I wanted to get married or not. And he was helping me to see that the secret is in the love, and to see what an amazing beloved God had given me. And then he helped me a few years later to open to having a child when I said, from my nap, I will never have another child. Because those, the experience of raising those first two children myself had been so painful. And he helped me to see that these were just pictures and that there was a whole other possibility. And now the three of us live in this amazing little cocoon of love buried in the woods. And it's like the most wonderful life I could have imagined, And none of this would have happened but for CD. None of it would have happened but for this path. None of this would have happened, of course, but for Allah. And yet I know that CD's guidance on moving back to the Northwest and everything else, was for my heart. And that somebody else, might ask the same question. And if their walking is different, let's say they're really good at listening to their heart, but they're not so good at grounding. And, in this world, CD might say to them something like, do you have a job? Do you have a place to live? Because everyone's issues and struggles are different, and everyone's path is different. And CD could see right to or was shown, exactly what we needed. So getting back to Mistora's question, when to take action and when to surrender to what is. I mean, when CD was around, like Rahima was alluding to, we could just go to him and ask him. And in a way that was really cool because he could just tell us, but it was also really hard, It was easy because well, for the obvious reason, he could just tell us, but it was also hard because he might not give us the answer we wanted. And sometimes, our nows could be really attached. And we would learn pretty quickly that if you're smart, you listen to what CD says, even if it's not what you want to hear. But now that he's not around anymore, it's more challenging. He came to me in a dream a year before he died, and he said, when I'm not here anymore, I will be even more here for you. This was when I had the sense that he wasn't going to be here very much longer. And that was really helpful. But since he's gone, I have trouble plugging into his energy. I have trouble finding it. And I'm kind of dense. So I have to really seek guidance. Starting with Tauba. CD said everything always starts with Tauba. And sometimes I request the assistance of other beloveds, like Amina or my wife, the people who I go to all the time. And, she's really good at checking in because she's a Latifa. And I rely on her. And then I always check in, to see what my own guidance is and to make sure that it lines up. I think the bottom line for me is at the end of the day, I want to be moving from a place of love rather than fear. And under the umbrella of love, I see qualities like hopefulness and excitement. And like I was saying earlier, al-Hay, life, Hay in Hebrew, l'chaim, to move from that place of life. And under fear are all the constricting qualities, which is, of course, where, my ego tries hardest to assert itself because it thinks it needs to protect me. So I really need at those times to turn back to Allah, because, because in truth, that's our only safety. He has that teaching about the ship of safety, and it's all in being close to Allah. Because, we can put our lives together really well in some way or other. In my case, I have this life that I've dreamed of, and other people have other ways of putting their lives together. Maybe you develop enormous charm, or maybe you've accumulated enormous wealth. But in truth, all of that can be taken from us in a moment, in an instant. And the only real foundation on which we can stand is Allah. There is no other foundation. And so, I think that, that's where we have to stand. We have to do our best to go inward and stand with God and to discern what is being asked of us and to follow that as best we know how.
Beautiful. Thank you, Roy and Hassan. I appreciate the beauty of what you shared, and thank you. It was still a little bit hard to hear you answer, and I appreciate those of you listening for hanging in there with us, and I hope that hopefully we'll get some clarification on what Roy shared in case you can't answer it. But beautiful. I really appreciate what you said about moving from love rather than fear and going inward, and that journey that can be sometimes challenging but very beautiful, to continue to go inward and to stand with God in your heart and to act from a place of love rather than fear in everything that we do and come to in the world. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to move on to our next panelist, who is Amina Melody Pryor. Let's see, I'm going to change the muting. All right. So Amina Melody Pryor. Amina is a Sufi spiritual healer. She's a family mediator and relationship coach. She's the founder of Sacred Art of Family. Her credentials include over 35 years of real-life experience in the trenches with long-term marriage, 3 adult children, their life partners, and extended family. Transforming conflict and fear into abundantly loving relationships in her own family has been a deeply rewarding path of spiritual growth. It fuels her passion to help other families learn how to create a deep, abiding peace in their own hearts and homes and experience the joy of family beyond their dreams. At the Sacred Art of Family, Amina Melody works with women and their families to bring healing and resolution to issues that are currently causing distress in their relationships. She helps her clients learn to access their own wisdom, guidance, and ability to choose love even in moments of stress and turmoil. As a result, families learn how to let go of the past, find forgiveness for mistakes, and move into the future with love and the skill to create and maintain beautiful, joyful relationships. Enjoy the peace, love, and support that allows everyone to flourish. Transform fighting and discord into the joy of love beyond what you ever imagined possible. So welcome, Amina Melody. Thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you to hear your response.
Thank you, Ms. Shira. I'm feel very blessed to have the opportunity to be here and to share this time with you all. You know, like Kamala said, that this is an interesting question to contemplate, and I felt like a little bit of kind of a trick question, like, you know, kind of have to kind of think about what this question really means. And as I started contemplating this, again, it took me back to my experience when we experienced the terrorist attacks of 9/11. I don't think any of us that were, you know, were here at that time, you know, will ever really forget, you know, what our initial response was to that, what that situation was about for us. But I remember as those events were unfolding that morning, it's like I just didn't want to hear about it. You know, it was just so beyond my comprehension to be able to take it in. And part of that not wanting to hear about it was because I didn't know where it was leading us to. You know, I really seriously thought, you know, this could be the brink of World War III. And I was so distressed about how can I live in a world like this? How can I be a mother of children and be in the world where these kinds of things could happen? So this led me into months of a very deep soul-searching journey. This was prior to embracing the Sufi path and knowing some of the things that I know now about how to be with the questions. And so it was just a very deep soul-searching time for me. And what I came to the realization from my contemplation was that there was really nothing I could do to take on the whole world, but there was a lot that I could do to do the best job that I could do in living my life and making a positive difference in the world. And so it was really through that intention about how can I really live my life in the best, fullest, most effective way that really opened the door to my own spiritual growth. And it was right around that time that I was doing life coach training, so that was a big part of it, really looking at how I could develop more skill to have more ability to reflect on my own inner process, how to more clearly and effectively communicate with others, you know, all those, you know, just really personal growth kinds of things. And then from there, my path unfolded, eventually led me to the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, and taking CD as my guide and my teacher, and, you know, learning all the things I've learned in this way, which has been really helpful. So I think we have to really stop and kind of think about a little bit what we mean when we say, what is God's will? And accepting God's will for what's happening in the world, what do we mean when we really say that? Because there's a way that that question troubles me in accepting God's will, because there's a way that we can, that can be really kind of passive aggressive, of being angry about what's happening, but feeling so, as Kamala said, so disempowered about it and feeling like it's out of our control. And so there's a way we can say, well, it's just God's will, it's God's plan, in a way of like kind of shrugging our shoulders and kind of giving up on the world and kind of giving up on our power and our ability to do anything about it. And that bothers me. I don't think that's really the way to be with it. And so there's kind of two perspectives here. I think one of the key things in understanding this question or talking about it or contemplating on it is that we have this tendency of wanting to kind of find easy to digest answers and have a tendency to want to put things into either or. It's either this or it's that. And this question really brings up the necessity of being able to be with the ambiguity, that there is no one clear, definitive answer to this question. So there's a couple of ways to look at this, and one has to do with the notion of our free will. So my understanding from being a student of Sufism over 10, almost 11 years, is that God gives us, human beings, a lot of influence about what happens in this physical world. So there is a level where our free will comes into play, and a way that we collectively, as humanity, we make choices and decisions and take actions in a way that then God allows us to make those choices and then to live with the consequences of our choices. And so on one level, that's why there's the horrific things that happen in the world, is because of the choices that we make as human beings and the way that, that we create trouble for ourselves and for each other by living from ourselves and forgetting about God and what God has really ordained for human beings. We turn away from those teachings, turn away from that connection, then we create a lot of problems. So we do have a responsibility for the state of the world on one hand. And on the other hand, it was interesting timing, it kind of interesting to me the way that God can work in our lives, because right after receiving the invitation to be part of this panel today, then the way things unfolded for me was that I connected with a book that C.D. wrote called Fruits from the Tree of Life. And there's a chapter in that book where C.D.'s students were actually asking him this very same questions about how to be with the strong things in the world, and there was C.D.'s answer right there. And so another perspective on this is that yes, what happens in the world is God's plan, and that nothing can really happen without the hand of God being involved in it. But not to stop with that, because behind all the things that happen in the world, C.D. says there is deep wisdom. And so that takes me to looking at the example of the prophets and the messengers that God sent to human beings over the course of time. And if you look at any of those prophets and what their lives were about, they lived in very strong times. There was a lot of trouble going on in the world. The powers that be, the status quo, the governments, the political situations that they lived with were very strong, and people were being hurt and people were suffering just like they are now. And yet look at the way that the prophets were with those strong things, is that it was through their surrender to God, that they were clear about what they'd been given to carry, what they had been given to share with the human beings around them, the way to be with all of that, and just to deliver the message, and to stay aligned with God, to stay aligned with the choice for love, to work to make positive change in what they could change. And then each one of them brought through something, so special for humanity. And if we can remember that and return to that, then that really gives us the answers that we're looking for. So in contemplating all these things, one is I think this is where faith comes in, is this perspective of seeing that, what CD says, that nothing can happen in the world without the hand of God, and that there is deep wisdom behind these strong things, just like there were in the times of the prophets, and when we can see in that historical perspective how things unfolded, the benefit that was received from those things. But we in our humanity, we can't really look at the world from that perspective of God and to be able to see the deep wisdom behind things. So we have to take things to a certain level on faith. Our faith in God, our willingness to trust God and what He's making, and then to feel how our hearts are moved by that and what there is for us to do, ways that we can contribute. So then that takes me to the second part of the question, being agents for change. And also then I just wanted to bring in some more pieces of this, what I read in the book about CD's teaching. So I saw this in several different places in his response to various questions about how to be with things in the world. He kept saying over and over and over again, do not worry, do not worry, do not worry. And so I was sitting with that because when CD says something repeatedly, I feel like there's a really strong message in that. And so I thought, the place where we go into worry is the place where we're in fear, where we've kind of somehow turned away from God, turned away from guidance, and we get all caught up in ourselves, and that's what creates worry. So, so number one is do not worry, and don't stop with the things that we see, the pictures that we see in the world of the things that are happening around us. Because when we're looking at those things, we're interpreting what we see in the world through our own filters and through our own experiences. And so if we just stop there, we can go into a place of hopelessness and anger and despair and feel like, the world's just going to hell in a handbasket, and what can we do about it? So what CD says is the important thing is always to be with God. Always to be with God. Always to give the love, the peace, and the mercy. And so when he says that, I look to him, to CD, and see his example. And he was actually talking to the students about how his life was living in Jerusalem. That was CD's home. He spent a lot of time, he came to the United States, he spent time here traveling and teaching all of us, but his home was in Jerusalem, and so he had to live with all of the strong things that were happening there in the Holy Lands over the course of time, over his lifetime. And so how was he with that? He had a school, he brought in the children, he fed the children, he gave them clothes, he took care of them, he took care of their families. And he was always giving, always helping the people. He had very little of himself, like he had minimal clothes and possessions, and everything that his life was about was giving, 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 and serving others. And so we can really take an example from him about how to be in the world in that way, to stay with God. And what does that mean? It means to do what we can do to make the world a better place.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go to some questions. Now, Rahima, I'm going to go back to you for the first question.
Okay.
Thank you. So I love what you shared about us being a part of evolution, and as you called it, our gift and ability to participate in the synergistic evolution, and feeling the call in the heart as being a part of that plan of evolution.
Yeah.
Can you give a word of advice, wisdom to people who are feeling a call in their heart, and maybe fearing fearing making a mistake or causing harm. Can you say a word about that? Because I think that's one of the things that comes up for a lot of people is that, yeah, I really want to, but it's scary. I don't want to do more harm than good.
Can you tell me a little bit? I'm not totally getting the concern. What would the concern of doing harm be?
That if I step up and start speaking out, that my actions might contribute to, might bring about a backlash, that it might be misunderstood. I might be putting myself in harm's way, putting my family in harm's way. I might be sparking more unrest in the world and the community. Yep. How can I act in a way that is responsible? Like to what, I guess to what extent should I follow the call in my heart?
Yeah.
Versus lay low in order to protect my family or not cause any, spark any fires.
Yeah, got it. I think that's a very, very, very real concern. I think for most people, the concern is more around personal safety, family safety, than it is around doing more harm if acting, right? I think the fear is that we, as agents for social change, will then become a target. That's a very real fear, and I can name thousands of people who have been killed because they've spoken out. So I can't give an answer that says you'll be protected if you act for good, right? That would be a misbelief in a sense, because there's many, many people, most people who've had very loud voices for civil rights and social change have been murdered. This became very real for me recently with the Pulse shootings in Orlando. I'm part of the LGBT community in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, and the Pulse shootings were right before San Francisco Pride, and that sent a ripple of fear in my community, because what better place to target, what better time of year to target than San Francisco Pride? So all of us were faced with that question very, very, very clearly. Do I stay home and hide, or do I go out and be a part of the social activism that I really believe in by marching for freedom and equality and rights? And so from my personal experience, and this is what I told my family, I said, look, the fear is real and the threat is there, and in some ways this is the most important time to organize and to have a voice and to act. And I told my family, I will check in with my heart and I will have an extra attention on my guidance, my inner guidance. So I think it's really important for us to have our receptors open and to follow the little signals that we feel inside. If we feel unsafe going somewhere, give that an extra moment to consider not going. And on the flip side, my true answer is, my life is going to be taken when my life is going to be taken. It might be tomorrow, it might be 75 years from now. I'm not going to stop following my heart's call out of fear. This goes to Hassan's comments. So me personally, I'm going to continue to act for social justice and for change. And I guess the short way of saying that is I'm willing to be a martyr. Not everybody may feel that way. I understand that. But I don't have a deep attachment to life like it's mine and it has to go a certain length or it has to go a certain way. I have a commitment to live every day from my heart, and I have a commitment to allow my values to be forefront in my actions. And that is much stronger to me than the need to live a certain amount of time.
Thank you, Rahima.
You're
That
welcome.
is beautiful. It reminds me of one of C.D.'s teachings that talks about what hits you could not miss you, and what misses you could not have hit you.
Yeah, I love that teaching.
Yeah, yes, I do too. You know, it does give some comfort. Thank you. So there are some questions for you on that coming up on the comments of the panel, but I want to ask a question of each of the others, and then we'll come back to those. So thank you. I want to go next to Hassan Roy. So I've got you unmuted, Hassan. Now you talked beautifully, and I'm going to ask you again to lean in and speak very loudly, just reminding you because you're hard to hear. But you talked about living from love rather than fear, and sometimes that fear can be so paralyzing that it really does stop us. And you know, again, Rahima talked about maybe just taking an extra pause. Can you give some advice on how to move through the fear to find that place of love, to get more clarity?
I'm sorry, to get more clarity.
Yeah, yes. So the question is how to move through the fear to be with the love, to find that love inside, so that you can have more clarity on the truth of what's calling you.
Well, I mean, I really admire the strength that came through Rahima as she spoke, you know, so fearlessly, or approaching life so fearlessly. I mean, I admire that. And
Can you speak a little bit louder?
yeah, I was saying I admire that, and I mean, I think for me, you know, really, it comes down to really checking into the deep. You know, it's like if I go, the more I can go into my heart, and the more I can find what Allah is placing there, the more clarity there is about how I have to go, and there's no choice anymore. I mean, what I think of is, like, for instance, when I met with CD about the possibility of having a child, because it was moving for my wife, and it wasn't moving for me at that time, and I had all this fear because I had raised these two children alone, and it had been so traumatic, and I had convinced myself that I didn't want to do that, that I had, you know, the rest of my life was going to be freedom, you know, and I had this image of what freedom looked like, and you know, but I said, you know, I trusted CD, and it was moving for her, so I said, well, why don't we go talk to him together? I don't promise I'm going to listen to what he says, because if it sounds like, you know, just something that a sheikh would say, that's generic, you know, that's different than if it really moves me, if I can really feel the truth of it moving in my soul. But let's see what happens. And just before we went to him, we were in Oregon, in Portland, and he gave this amazing teaching on surrendering to what Allah is moving with regard to your relationship, and really giving of yourself to your beloved. And we both came out of there just like in this incredible place of bowing our hearts. And, you know, Sidi could put us in such a state of intimacy. And she turned to me at that moment and she said, you know, we don't need to bring this to Sidi. You know, you're 50 years old. You've worked so hard to raise 2 kids. You deserve to retire. And I sat with that for about a second, and I was like, well, then you'd never get to know what it is to be a mother. And I had said to her on the, you know, when we first met, you know, I've had all the kids I'm going to have. So I mean, there was no obligation. She had told me that was fine. She didn't want to have any kids, but you know, it was like in my heart at that point, what came through was like, well, then you'd never get to be a mother. I don't know what's right here. I don't know who's supposed to surrender or what we're supposed to surrender. But let's just go to Sidi and talk to him. And when I did, you know, Sidi, you know, I think that what often a sheikh would do is like he doesn't want to come between you and Allah, so he just tries to bring through the light without showing you all he has. And so Sidi starts with, you know, just like what sounded like platitudes to me, like, you know, yes, you know, like, why would you say no to the love? The more, you know, if God blesses you with a child, you know, and that wasn't working for me. So I said, Sidi, but you don't understand. And I was like really pushing, like, you know, I had these 2 children and I raised them myself, and it was so hard. They kept saying all these things that weren't going in. or at least not at that moment. And then finally, at some point, he gave me one of the versions that he often gave me of what I talked about earlier. You know, you can't see what I see because I'm seeing with the eye of my heart. So that constant theme that he would show me, you know, if you could see what I see. And as he said this to me, he just kind of looked at me, and somehow he pulled this back this veil, and I could just feel all this light coming into my heart and into my soul. And it was after he had said things like, you know, this child will be better than your other child, and you know, like children are, you know, like things that made no sense. But when he said that, I just felt all this light, and I couldn't deny it. But being somebody who was raised in a very rational world, I wasn't going to just trust it in that moment. It was kind of like, you know, whenever I talked to CD, there was a moment when you just know you're done. At that moment, I knew I was baked, and I was just looking at him going, uh-huh. And, you know, he releases us, and I just sat with that for months. And every time I looked in my heart, you know, my mind still had all the fear and all the craziness. But every time I looked in my, you know, because what it looked like from my mind was like being a mule harnessed to a cart and pulling that cart uphill for the rest of my life. And then I'll be finished raising this child in time to die. And that's, you know, so that's pretty bleak. But every time I would feel what CD had opened me to in my heart, it was still there. It felt like it was even deeper than the heart. It was the soul. It was like all this light. But I was scared. I didn't trust it. And so one morning I was in the shower. This was probably 2 or 3 months after meeting with him. And for me, in the shower is where things, you know, the light moves the most. Something about the running water, being under the running water. And I'm standing there with this, and it suddenly hit me because I'm like, the light is still there, just as strong as it was when CD opened me to it. And I realized that, like, I could spend the rest of my life questioning this. Like, my mind will never understand it. And at the same time, I couldn't deny that it was there in my heart, and I had to make a choice as to whether I was going to trust it or not, whether I was going to be safe and live from my mind, or whether I was going to trust what's moving and trust that it really was from Allah, and that God really wanted what was best for me. And so at that moment, I realized that there was no choice. It was kind of like, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be the kind of person who always lives in fear? Or do I want to be the kind of person who trusts and does his best to live from the light? And so I came out of the shower and I said to my wife, I said, how about, you know, we don't try to have a child and we don't try not to have a child. We just see what Allah brings us. And you know, she lit up because that's exactly what she wanted. You know, and then, I mean, I can't tell you how, like, the greatest of all the gifts I've gotten on this path is this son that we have. He'll be 2 years old next month. And to think that I had wanted, you know, from my naps, I was saying no to, like, the greatest joy that I've ever experienced in my life. I mean, it really illustrates that point that you know, the Sufis sometimes say that, you know, like, whatever we want for ourselves, God wants for us 10 times as much, 100 times as much, 1,000 times as much, 1,000,000 times as much. But to get there, we have to get out of our own way. We have to, you know, we have to let go and allow what's moving to move, because we can say no to it. And so, you know, thank God CD was there to help me to see this and to get out of my own way and to stand in this miracle. So, I mean, the key for me is, and I don't always do it well. I mean, I'm learning. I've how to learn to just how to receive what God is trying to show me. And now that CD's not around anymore, I have to really work at it because, you know, like I said, I'm pretty dense. So I have to work through all the layers of denseness to get to what's really moving.
Thank you, Hassan Roy. Yeah, so what I really love what you said about feeling the truth moving in your soul. And I think all of us have maybe had those experiences where you just feel that truth moving in your soul, and your decision and commitment to be a person who trusts and who moves with trust from that truth that you feel in your heart and in your soul. So greatly appreciate you sharing your experience there. Now I'm going to move to Melody Amina. Amina, can you give people, and then there's a question on the panel I want to go to. So, Amina, can you give people a tangible step that they can take to begin to affect change in the world?
Sure, Miss Shira. I'd like to speak for just a moment about my own personal experience and how the answer to this question has unfolded for me. Was what really drew me into Sufism is that I came to a place in my life where for many years I've been suppressing a lot of emotional pain. And I came to a point where that pain was just starting to upwell in my heart, and I couldn't suppress it anymore. And so it was really what CD taught us in this way of Sufism about how to experience healing in our own hearts, to experience healing for emotional pain, was what really drew me in and has really kept me walking on this path. And one of the ways that I was in a lot of emotional pain was how I would look at things in the world, and where I saw things were good and beautiful, then I could see that God was there. And where things were dark and difficult and troubled, there was a way that I was going into separation in my own heart, so I couldn't see God in that darkness. It felt like, like somehow God was missing, or God turned away, or God didn't care. And it wasn't about God turning away, it was how I was turning away from God and looking at it, from my own perspective. So when we see the things that trouble us in the world, one way that we can be with that and to start to affect change is to look at what it is about those things that draw us into them. What's troubling us, really what that is about in our own hearts. Not who's to blame out in the world, but what is going on in our own personal experience, in our own heart, like why that's drawing us into that. And that can help us to uncover the wounded places in our own heart, to see what our own, what we call pictures and voices, the illusions that we carry about things, the misunderstandings, misconceptions we have about things. We can start to flesh those things out by looking at what we see in the world that troubles us, and then turning that back into ourselves, to help us in our own process of spiritual healing and spiritual development and growth. And so that, and when we do that, when I was sharing about the teaching from CD, when he said, "Don't worry, don't get caught up in what's going on in the world, stay with God." Well, what does that mean, to stay with God? And this is what it is. It's how we, we use this term, walking, which means, to me, really engaging in our own process of spiritual growth and development. And so we can look at the things in the world that trouble us to help us in our walking, or help us in our spiritual growth. And that is how we draw closer to God, because we're cleaning away those pictures, those filters, those misconceptions and misunderstandings. The more that we let go of those things, and we see that there really is nothing outside of God. For me, it was really a place of healing, how I was going into separation about it was this or it was that. It was either the light or the darkness. But now I really can see and really hold in my heart that the light and the darkness are both a part of God's creation. And so I have more ability to be with what is and not go into that place of separation. So then that allows me to, in that place of being with God, to feel more empowered and more clear about what my purpose is and what I'm called to do to serve here, and what is God calling me to do about whatever it is that I see. And so those are two questions we can ask ourselves: is what is it about this that's drawing me into it when we're looking at the trouble? And then the other question is, then what am I being asked to do about it? And I do feel like there's really a place of responsibility for being a human being living in this world, that there was a purpose why we're here, and that we need to know what that purpose is and take responsibility for fulfilling it. And so so there's several suggestions that I have, actually. One is I feel it's really essential to engage in daily spiritual practice. And I've had some conversations with people around this. They think that, well, God is in us, God is all in the world, God is everything, God is everywhere, so it just is. So why do I need to engage in spiritual practice? Well, it's true that God just is in everything, but what we need to do as human beings is we need to keep continuously reminding ourselves of that. We need to remember that. We need to connect with that and be in relationship with that. And the way that we do that is through daily spiritual practice. So whatever way that speaks to our heart in whatever forms of prayers or meditation or whatever it is, that helps us to remember and to be with God and to be with God's love and mercy and peace, that's really an essential element for me. Because CD says, don't worry, don't get caught up in things. Stay with God, stay with the love. Well, how do we do that? We need to do that, through daily spiritual practice, to make that connection, to keep that focus in our lives. So that's a big one. And then, like I said, using the things that catch us, that trigger us about what's going on in the world to help our own personal growth. So those two things. And then the third thing is really about service. It's about, as we do our own spiritual growth and heal those places inside of us, then that increases our capacity to carry God's love and peace and mercy inside of ourselves. And so we become like this light, this lamp in our lives, that we're shining that light out and helping to illuminate the darkness around us. And we can do that in many ways, however we're called to do that, more like what Kamala's talking about social activism and social justice, kind of more on the front lines kind of way, if we feel called to do that. And not everybody's called to do it in that way. And one thing that everybody can do is just to look at how you're being with your own family and your own home and the people in your daily lives. I remember there was a time that I started becoming aware of myself, and that it didn't seem to matter what my husband said to me, that I'd always snap back some answer at him, just the snappy retort, and it would just fly out of my mouth, and I was like, oh my gosh, where is this coming from? Why do I keep doing this? So I had to just kind of keep working with myself to kind of, figure out what was going on for me, why I was being so snappy, or my daughter coming into the kitchen and asking me, for the third time, what's for dinner, and just turn around, I already told you, and it, so, it's like, where is this coming from, So it's so true. It's kind of easy to say in a way it sounds like kind of a cliche, but it is such a deep truth that world peace begins in our own hearts and our own homes. And so really looking at how we can engage in our own spiritual growth, engage in spiritual practice, and then how we carry that into our relationships with people right in our own home. It's really, really that process of bringing healing into my own family that's given me the passion to do the work that I do.
Beautiful. I'm so glad that you brought that up, Amina, because that is one of the core components of the peacemaking program. One of our Masters of Divinity tracks is peacemaking, and that is one of the core messages from that. And the core teaching is how it really does start in every heart with what you carry in the world and how you relate to each and every person around you. It's got to start with each individual. So thank you so much for bringing.
The thing that's so important about families is what we experience at home and also what we carry out into the world. And so when we can really, bring the teachings of the love and the peace and mercy into home, and our kids learn that, then our kids go to school, then they're able to give that to their friends, and then that, it's like, it ripples out there. When it starts at home, it ripples out into the world.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. It reminds me of something that I heard recently. I attended the conference called the Festival of Faiths, and Aaron Gandhi was one of the speakers. He's a grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, and he gave a beautiful teaching about the passive acts of violence versus active acts of violence. and something that his grandfather gave him to do. I'll share his on tomorrow on the blog. I'll put a blog post here, and I'll share his talk there because it was really beautiful and worth listening to. It's but it's about looking at everything in our lives and where those things, those thoughts that we have and those feelings we have, and the things that trigger us and cause us to react to what's going on in the world in one way or another, that how those can become passive acts of violence in a sense, and how it takes all of these passive acts of violence to provide the fuel for the active violence, active acts of violence in the world. And so for each one of us, it's one of the things that we can do is to look at our own passive acts of violence and how we can clean those up. And Amina Melody, you spoke to that in a beautiful way about how we can clean our own hearts and our own relationship to all the things that we see in the world, and how that can affect how we move forward in our relationships with others and everything that we see. Now, all right, we've got 6 minutes left on this. I'm going to read this question. I think, Lisa, I think your question was answered in our first round of questions, but I'm going to read this other one. This is from Kate. It says, I love what Kamala said about the bigger picture of spiritual evolution. As a historian, I'm trained to look at the long-term trends. I wonder if some of the horrible events we are experiencing, or perhaps recognizing and reacting to more and more, might actually be a backlash against the rapid movement toward global unity and acceptance by those who are not ready for the positive God-given evolution of our species. I'd love to hear the panel thoughts on this. So let me just read that a little, the key points of that one more time, and if you guys can, I'm going to ask you to just volunteer who wants to answer, because I don't think we have time for each person to give an answer. So I wonder if some of the horrible events we are experiencing, or perhaps recognize and reacting to, more and more might actually be a backlash against the rapid movement toward global unity and acceptance by those who are not ready for the positive God-given evolution of our species. Any thoughts on that? Okay, Roy?
Yeah.
Lean in close. Speak loud.
I mean, what comes into my heart around that is just that, I mean, I think that's true. There's in the sense that, our society is changing demographically, and we're becoming much more multicultural, and that is certainly creating fear for some people, and that has a lot to do with the constriction that's been moving for a while now. I mean, I think for some people, it's like, I often think that having the Obama family in the White House is so beautiful, something that our grandparents couldn't have dreamed of, and it shows us how far we've come and how far we still have to go, because the strong reaction that it has engendered, really shows us that that we're not there yet, and certainly we've also seen that as it becomes more and more clear how if you're an African American in this country, and you live in fear of having a broken taillight, because when you get stopped, unlike those of us who are white and know that the police officer is just going to be nice to us, you might get pulled out of the car and slammed to the ground or worse. And so for people who are, and that's not even necessarily because of overt racism. It could just be because everyone sees through their filters. We all see through our pictures, to use the Sufi term, and so there's a tendency to see those who we see as being like us as being worthy of our empathy, and people who are different as not as somehow being the other. And this evolution that your question refers to, I think what's happening is, for many of us, there's a sense of the in-group being all of us, more and more of us until it becomes all of us. And there are people whose hearts aren't there yet. There are people who are I remember the Dalai Lama, somebody asked him about fundamentalism, and he said it's a great first step toward the unity. Everybody is in their own place, and we can't sit in judgment because we don't know what Allah has put them up against in their lives. all of us, to some extent, only know what we know because of what our parents taught us when we were 5 years old and younger. And so, I mean, I have the advantage of having had a very open family, a very politically open family, a family that, I mean, my grandmother was a communist, my mother was a red diaper baby. So, and so I think that set me up well to be open to a lot of the trends of this century, which, not everyone had that advantage. Some people are living in fear. Some people are really having trouble with the adjustment. And so this idea that, we people who have had privilege have actually had privilege, and that maybe we're not going to have as much privilege in the future. And so I love what Amina said about spiritual practice, because for somebody like me who's dense, I mean, there's no other way to get to what Allah is asking of me than to find some way to break through the outer into the inner, and it takes a lot of work to do that.
Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to give a minute for Rahima, because I see that you had unmuted also. Thank you, Hassan. Roy.
Sure, I can give a 1-minute answer. My answer is I hope so. I hope that is what's going on. And I think there are those of us that are working to promote the evolution that I was talking about, and there's those of us that are not within that stream. And I think that those that are not within the stream will naturally not be a part of the evolution.
Maybe even polarized to keep things the same, because that's what we know is the safety zone, as opposed to the change. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I want to thank each one of our panelists, Rahima, Kamala Laird, Hassan Roy Martin, and Amina Melody Pryor. I want to thank you each for your times, for your hearts, for your answers, and I want to thank everyone who is listening and participating. I see we have more comments coming in on the blog post. So for those of you posting comments, I'm going to do my best to get your questions answered in writing, because we need to go ahead and wrap up the broadcast now, because we're at the end of time. So I want to thank you for your time and for listening, for watching. If you would like more information about any of these speakers, their websites are on the in the blog post at essenceoftheone.com, which is hosted by our friends at patheos.com. Thank you. And if you want more information about the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, there's a link for that as well as a link to a program that teaches a practice called the Remembrance, which is all about, it's a spiritual practice for, kind of like a meditation practice for purifying the heart and cleaning the heart and washing the heart of all of those places where things get stuck. And we have those, as several people said, our hearts need to be cleaned. Our hearts need to be reminded of their connection to God, and we need to remember that. We need to continually wash and return and return and return. So there is a link to a program there. We, as I said, the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism offers a number of Masters of Divinity programs, one of them being Spiritual Peacemaking. We do have a class, we're enrolling now for a class that starts in the fall. If you're interested, please connect with us. You can go to sufiuniversity.org. And if you want to find out about other free things going on, you can go to sufiuniversity.org/info, I-N-F-O. And Sufi is spelled S as in Sam, U, F as in Frank, I. So thank you very much for your time and for being with us this evening. Please continue to post your comments and questions, and we'll do our best to get back to you. Have a beautiful evening.